Hi, everybody. This is Joanne Manister, Science Goddess on Twitter, and I'm with Read Science with my co-host Jeff Schomeyer, who is sitting in his office in Maryland. And we are joined today by Hope Jahren, I should have asked, who is the author of the wonderful Lab Girl, which I hope you have read. And if you haven't read it, get it for the holidays and read it if you have a few moments, because it's an amazing book. It is unlike any other popular science book I've ever read, because it mixed sort of this memoir with this discussion of plants, and the writing about the plants is really transcendent in my opinion. And I am not a poetry prose kind of lover, but yet I found myself completely enthralled. Hope, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
And Hope is sitting in Oslo, Norway, where she is now, leaving the warmth and loveliness of Hawaii for a different kind of loveliness over there. So Hope is an American geochemist and geobiologist at the University of Oslo, known for her work using stable isotope analysis to analyze fossil forests dating to the Eocene. She's won many prestigious awards and you know, won multiple Fulbright scholarships, so that's awesome. And she is also an advocate for raising public awareness about science. And I remember, I knew who you were, Hope, but then when you came to the forefront for the Manicure Monday thing, where we can talk more about this, 17 magazine did this Manicure Monday where people would show up their lovely, pristine nails. And whereas then you wanted to point out, but our nails are important too. The people who do work in science, you know, like my little short nails. So, you know, people who do work with their hands and not necessarily are making these beautiful nails. It was your way to say, you know, scientists, you know, have contributions as well. And then I remember an article you had also written about sexual harassment, just so well written. And Hope, by the way, has a blog called Hope Jahren Sure Can Write. And I hope you tell me the story behind that title. I assume some teacher wrote it on its paper. And we are just really, really glad to have you with us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
So Jeff usually throws out the first question, so we're going to let him get started.
All right. Hope, I would like to talk for a while about being a scientist, and there could be, because I think this is what one of the great things that your book tells the reader, which is about what it's like to be a scientist. So I want to begin with what I'd like to think is my biggest compliment for your book. The way I understand poetry, which is not very good, is as a communication channel that's not the same as narrative, exposition, prose, and things, but that the poet makes juxtapositions that add depth to meaning in a way that layers of paint from Renaissance painters might add depth to color and things. And so when I say your book struck me as a poetic way of looking what it's like to be a scientist, that's what I'm thinking of, partly because of the way you take your autobiographical anecdotes, juxtapose them with alternating chapters about the life of plants and the depth that comes from that. And now I have to see if I can remember, but there were times when I even got very emotional because your stories talk about your experience as a scientist, but that's not what I mean. You describe sometimes some things that I'll want to quote in a bit about what it's like to be a scientist, but that's not what I mean. When I got emotional, it was this sort of poetic juxtaposition, and I felt at times like I was getting this direct communication from your mind of what it feels like to be a scientist. And I thought that was really, really cool. And I wish I could think of a question to say about that. You know, it's like, oh, did you know you were doing that? Or how did you decide to do that? But
Well, let me start by thanking you and saying that, it gives me great joy to hear that. I hear from readers, and I hear from readers that aren't scientists who say, I was never good at science, or I never liked it, or I hated my classes, but I love this book. I wish she'd been my teacher. She makes it so interesting, and that's spectacular. It gives me great joy. And I also hear from other scientists that say, this is what it's really like. This is somebody who let everybody look behind the curtain, and that also gives me great joy. That something about it worked. And I do hear from readers, all the time. And I guess there are also reviews out there.
Oh,
Okay,
wow.
so here's the thing.
You have to move.
Okay. So,
wow.
That was a cool effect.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
we forgot to tell our viewers that we'll have like special effects today.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm here in Oslo, and it's pitch dark outside. The sun doesn't come up until 10, and it goes down at 4. So it's pitch dark outside. And then we've got these energy saving lights where if you don't move enough, they go off.
Yes.
Sitting at my desk actually working is not considered like a live level of movement or something. They go off every few minutes, and it just makes me feel like such a loser. I don't know what they're trying to do with this thing, and multiple times I've taken that thing off the wall to try to figure out how to rig it so it'll just.
You need a treadmill desk, maybe, that will give enough movement.
No, that's the thing and that's the other thing about being a scientist. I suppose all the offices are like this, but there are these moments of just absurdity.
Yeah. Well, yes.
Where you're trying to do your job, and it's supposed to be this lofty, noble thing, and you're creating new knowledge and everything like that. But you need somebody, the universe keeps turning the lights off every 8 minutes while you're trying to do it.
Oh, I look forward to the next episode of Lights Out.
Yeah. No, I think part of what motivated me about the book was that we do so much talking about how we need more scientists in America, and a lot of talking about how to make girls into scientists. How do we fix little girls so that they grow up and become scientists, which is I guess supposed to be a good thing, I guess. And I get asked, because I supposedly made it or something, right? I get asked about, it's somehow my job to recruit women into science or whatever. And I said, well, we could start by telling people what it's really like. Because I for all the lofty and laudable things we say about what science is, the actual work of doing it every day is a different sort of thing. And it's a kind of, I don't know if it's drudgery or whatever. I happen to love it, but it's you have to embrace that part of it. If you want to see the odd moment of joy of a big discovery, you're going to have to embrace an awful lot of incremental observation, right?
Right.
And yet sometimes things shine
but
through.
I don't think that's a grind. I don't. That's not a sacrifice. If I had to live my life over again, I would never trade any of those endless boring moments I spent staring at machines that wouldn't work or anything like that, because it makes me complete in a different sort of way.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I was
that was the challenge, right?
It's interesting. So when I was actively doing research so many years ago, that my favorite thing was being locked in the room with that electron microscope. It's dark, it's quiet, you're there for hours, and then you go to the dark room. Well, you don't do that anymore. it's all digital, but and then also the satisfaction when something breaks down and you figure out how to repair it without calling someone, or there's just so many things that really small pleasures in the hands-on sciences that I like when I'm reading your book, and I could totally relate.
And so much of the progress that you make is made. You don't realize that you don't realize that you're building something, but you are. And I think a lot of people have that in their lives. I think about, my mother used to talk about the end of the day when you could finally sit down and sit by the fire and mend things. And she just, it wasn't, fixing socks. It wasn't, glamorous, important work or whatever, but it was kind of her time to feel like she was getting something done and relax, and her mind went to a kind of another place. Some people feel like that when they go for a run. People have that. And I think what was important was to say that some people have that while they're doing science, that's a component of what being a scientist is, for me at least.
And that I would, like Joanne, my good times were sitting overnight taking data when the elevators weren't running and things in my low temperature lab, and listening to the pumps and things. And it was a very almost a meditative sort of thing. And you can see that seemed to poke through when you're telling stories about preparing all of those pieces for your gas chromatography or something, these standards that you would measure things against in the mass spectrometers and things. Okay, it's, doing 200 of those with a little thing is drudgery, but sometimes a little bit of that bigger involvement would poke through too. It seems like sometimes you get that feeling when you're in this meditative place, don't you?
Yeah, I think your subconscious is working on the problem the whole time, the larger problem. I also, one of the great joys of my life was that it was doing it with somebody. It seems like a very solitary activity, and it can be. But I'm lucky enough to work with, my best friend. And so I can do it in one room and know that he's next door doing it in the next room. And there's something about the fact that we are two people in two separate bodies that share this one idea, and not just an idea, but an idea space that has existed for decades. There's something I'll never get over. How lucky I feel that's true.
There's a lot I want to talk about Bill too, and that's part of the whole thing of when you seem to be writing about one thing, you're also writing about another. So it's like, oh, here's where you're writing about Bill, but actually you're writing about working with this person and doing science. Or here's where you're talking about making a discovery, but actually you're talking about the satisfaction of working with Bill. Or here where you're talking about the drudgery in your lab, but you're actually talking about what this means. That's part of the poetic thing. And there were a couple times when you actually put in words some of these things, but the one very early on when you're talking about sort of the first time you get that feeling of seeing something when you're looking at the little, identifying that little bit of opal dust. And I quote you here earlier saying you were the only person for a while in an infinite exploding universe who knew that this powder was made of opal. And you're going to tell people, but for just a little bit. You're the only person, that you know of who knows that thing, and knowing things, finding out things is exciting, and then telling people about it is exciting. It's fun to tell people too, isn't it?
Yeah, you can't invest too much in how they react.
No.
That's the other thing I always, do is encourage people to stop at that moment and take it in and really enjoy those times when you figure something out, because it is a special, I don't know if I have words for it, but it's a wonderful thing to grow as a person and to be able to pinpoint that moment when you grow. And it's also, in some ways, it's a very private moment. It's proof that you are an existential individual, you know, compared to all the wide population of the whole planet. You know, what you know is, especially at moments like that, it's something unique and special. And
Go ahead.
Joy and satisfaction of that moment has to be enough to justify the moment itself. You can't make your pleasure in the field or contingent on whether or not people appreciate your finding, or whether or not you're right when you figure these things out, or whatever.
Yeah, boy, is that true.
If you do it, I always say, you know, take time to really feel and take in the important moments like that, and use that as your reward. Because if you chase that, you'll always be on the right path. But, you know, if you chase praise and promotion and awards, and that stuff may not come. You know, science is fickle, and it's also biased. And, you know, I mean, all these other things are true, and it may come, but it may not come. But those rewards that you can give yourself, those will come.
While we're still talking about being a scientist, there's one other thing that you said that I wanted to quote that I thought was very telling. And this is when your early days, when you were at Georgia Tech, and you're crossing the campus at midnight on a Friday night, going to your lab. And here I'm quoting now: "In the rhythm of those Friday nights beats the honest, humble heart of science, and it also explains how discovery and mischief are two sides of the same coin." And this goes with something that you say at the end of the book that sounded almost the same, like the other side of it, where you say, "We think of this as progress because it is our impossible job to manufacture new information out of whole cloth. Along the way, we also manage to become adults without ceasing to be children." Mischief is an important part of discovery, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Aren't scientists always a little bit childish still? They've held on to something, it seems like.
I'm not sure. I mean, I know what's true for me is that I spent so many years in the lab. You know, I mean, there's a lot of stuff I didn't do. You know, the book is full of the stuff that I did do, but there's a lot of stuff that I didn't do. Like I've never been to a concert. I've never been to a club. I think I've been to a movie theater a couple times. You know, I didn't, and these are things that people do, most people do, in order to, you know, socially grow and experience the world. And, you know, I didn't have a bank account until I didn't have a checking account until I was 26. You know, I didn't own a car. You know, I was doing all this science. I was doing a lot of stuff, and I was growing in a certain way. But in another way, you don't participate in the world in a certain way. And I guess that always made us feel like, I don't know if it made us feel like children. I'll tell you what I've always loved is having somewhere to go. I've always loved to take the shift on Friday night or Saturday night or the holiday shift or whatever, because I just love to have somewhere to go during these big, long, open times when you're supposed to
be at the club.
I don't know, go to clubs or movies or whatever it is, because you get the benefit of, I like to be useful. I like to feel useful. I like to be, I've always had too much, trying to burn off enough energy every day has always been a challenge, although as I approach 50, that's getting easier. And you can kind of feel, this is the other thing, is you can also feel kind of self-righteous about the fact that you're working on Friday. You're pulling the hospital shift on Friday night instead of, or New Year's Eve or whatever it is. And so you don't have to, and so there's something about it that you feel like you're entitled to kind of be a little less, I don't know, professional or be a little less serious about, you give yourself kind of a lot of breaks because, hey, I'm the real deal. I'm here on Friday night. And I've always loved the combination of, that feeling of like, here we are, we're doing something useful, but as long as we do more than nothing, it's a good night. And what do you want to do? We got, I got nowhere else to be, I've always loved that. And universities are great because, it's not it's not a 9-to-5 factory or workplace or whatever. There is that wonderful, wonderful time over the weekend when the whole place is yours, is how it feels.
All right, I have now something to switch over because I want to talk about Bill too, who looms very large in here. And
well, actually, Jeff, because I do want to talk about Bill too. Let me jump in really quickly. So, here we were talking about attracting girls to science or anyone to science, and a lot of the things levied against scientists are, well, they don't go have fun, and they do it all alone. But your book so clearly shows you did not do this alone. And the fun is sort of built in. It's, you know what I mean? I feel like your book, even though you say you don't go to clubs, you don't go to whatever, well, that's what they think is having fun, then they'll make time for it. But, I feel like your book actually addresses a lot of these critiques of scientists, oh, you'll never get married, you'll never do this, but your book just shows you did all those things. You know what I mean? That people are like, oh, but if I this, if I that, so I feel like, because I get that all the time. It's like, oh, I don't want to be stuck in the lab all the time. Well, some of us like the lab and, we don't consider it being stuck, but you also don't have to be in the lab all the time. So I felt like your book had that underlying important message that, some of the things you say about a scientist are right, but we see it completely differently, and you can make your life what you want it to be. So
yeah, I think one important message that I try to give women is something that I believe is that, no matter how you live your life, at the end of it, you're going to have regrets over whatever it was you didn't do.
Right.
There's so many different paths that you can take, and you can only take one of them,
Right.
And so you're always going to wonder what life had been like if you take another path. And the way to address that is to have people in your life that have taken other paths and be close to them and share with them their triumphs and sorrows over what that path yielded. And so we, and that's as close as we can get to having all these experiences. But we had some fun along the way. I think, here's what I think. I think that we seek joy and meaning and love in our lives. And I wanted to write a book to show that by practicing science, a lot of it, really hard, and doing almost nothing else, I was able to somehow put all those pieces together.
Yes. And
it wasn't easy, and it wasn't pretty, and it wasn't, and I'm not completely proud of, a lot of the things that we did, and I'm very proud of some of the things that we did. But I wanted it to be real. I think we have so many books that kind of talk about, I don't think, you know, for a long time I went into the bookstore, you know, I always wanted to write, and I can write pretty well. And I knew that, you know, people have been telling me that since I was very small. And I would go into the bookstore and say, you know, I feel this need, this physical need to write. And I'd go into the bookstore and be like, good Lord, I'm up to my eyeballs. I'm literally up to my eyeballs in books. You know, does the world need another book? And so before I did this, I thought very, very hard about how this book would be different. What would it do that science books don't do? And I just was so plagued by the what I saw as the failure of popular science books to tell the real story of what, you know, they're very good at explaining what we figured out, but how did we get there?
Yes.
And the whole story, the parts that aren't pretty and the parts that are so pretty, they deserve a whole chapter. And so I did the best I could, and really from the beginning, you know, once it was a manuscript, I was getting really electric reactions to it. And hopefully, you know, if nothing else, it's an honest, it's a brutally honest account of what these last 20-some years have been like.
Phenomenal. You did a phenomenal job, because I thought, wow, okay, oh wait, I will tell everybody here and you, I read the book first, then I got the audio, because you had read the audio. And that, oh my, Jeff, if you ever have the chance, do it.
I will.
Because your voice, I could hear the tears in your voice when it was something sad, and I can hear the elation in your voice. And you know, it was, you know, I like listening when the authors read, but this was something very special, because you really had emotion right in there, like another narrator could not have done for your book. Only you could have done it. So if people out there, if you're, you know, if you like audiobooks, I recommend Hope's, but be prepared to sort of want to cry with her. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm getting some tears now, because there were moments where I was like, oh my gosh, you know. I know that
this was part of the initial contract when it became clear that the book was actually going to be published. As I said, I want to read the audiobook. I can't imagine anybody else saying this stuff. And I'm not a professional voice. You go into the studio and you meet these people that are professional audiobook. I don't know if they're actors or they're voice.
Yeah, voice artists, narrators. And I don't know.
They sound beautiful. You know, you talk to them across a cup of coffee, and you know, it's like this beautiful. And I'm not. That's not me, right? But reading it out loud was a really great experience. And we did it over the course, it was very emotional, because we did it over the course of just a couple days, and we stayed very late in the evening and just kind of pounded through it. And I remember we ordered a pizza, and the guy couldn't find the door to the studio. And so I was reading one chapter, and I was like, I'm hungry. I was like, because this was, you know, the most, if I only have one thing I want to tell people about how hard this was, it's this thing. And then I realized I was also, I'm hungry. And it was hard, and I'm sad, and I don't know if people care, and I'm hungry. And I always laugh, you know, Jessica Kay was the audio editor, and she was so lovely. And she was, you know, I'd look out in the studio, and if she was laughing, I knew I was doing a good job, because she would just pull off her headphones and just laugh. And she kept saying, you know, Hope, this is good stuff. This is going to be a big book. It will. Yeah. And it was it was a great experience.
Well, I'm really glad you read it, because it really
Yeah.
added an element to it that, you know, even reading it was good, but the audio, I was like, now I know what's going to happen, but now I'm got tears again, because, you
I
know.
kept asking her, are you going to leave in that stuff about pizza?
They know how to take it out.
Joanne, tell me this, Joanne, or I want to see if we had the same thing. We're talking, for people who are talking, we're telling us like we responded emotionally to a lot of these things in here. And for Hope, this is pretty far from a Hollywood biography or a biography of a Hollywood scientist. This one has so much reality in it. And the things that made my eyes a little misty, were a lot misty at times, weren't sad stories about rolling the van over or bad things that had happened that, in the movie version would be the points where we say, now you're allowed to feel emotional or something. It was those things I was talking about where not even during the exposition, but when I'm getting these poetic layers and suddenly I have another revelation that we're sharing these feelings of what it's like to do science. And those were so true and so familiar and so difficult to express that I just was like overwhelmed. I say, look, but you can't, I can't read one sentence to someone and say, here she says what it's like to be a scientist. And I say, you have to read these 4 chapters and it all goes together like this and you'll feel what it's like to be a scientist. So Joanne, when we're talking about an emotional reaction, it's more than just bad things or good things that happen. There's a connection.
And I felt so driven to give that back too.
Yeah.
I think a lot about how, we spend people's taxes to do this work.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not very much, as you're
constantly very little
in the book, but asking yourself, am I doing something useful? It doesn't matter if this extinct plant functioned more efficiently under high CO2, 200 million years. It doesn't matter. There's people hurting in the world, and why, if I have a brain and I know this stuff, why aren't I working on something more important? And so I always felt like it would help me with that if I could give, that feeling back, at least as repayment for, I'm sitting on a chair that somebody built, and I'm eating an apple that somebody grew, and I'm taking medicine that a doctor prescribed for me, and how can I give back? How can I share why we do this and what it's like, and really let you feel what it is, in a way that, no, you're not going to walk this path. You're not going to be a scientist. You've got to, I need you in the hospital being a doctor or whatever. But can you, for a few pages, really have the experience of what it's like to do this? And do you want it? That was the other question.
How do we explain to people that knowing things and figuring things out seem important and worthwhile?
Yeah.
Rather than the PR question that I've gotten all the time, it's like, well, that's all very fine, but how's this going to cure cancer and make life better for us in 10 years? Like, well, it's not. The work that I do is not. But can't you understand that I'm learning? We're knowing things that we will now know that we didn't know before, and knowing is good.
Yeah, and
very effective lighting.
I know, it's probably going to make me live longer.
Right. Pump the blood a little.
Yeah, I mean, we also, science is so incremental, and the work that we do, everybody is doing just a very, very tiny piece of something that's so big, any one of us can't see it fully.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a component of, and I've searched for a better word than faith, but I can't come up with one. There's a component of faith that spend the hours, and we trust in ourselves and in our training and in the sacrifices that past scientists have made, that we're going somewhere good.
Mm-hmm.
We're going toward growth, and we don't always know what kind of growth that will be. But I try to talk about how maintaining almost, spiritual strength for that journey
Mm-hmm.
is such a huge part of staying in science, and especially establishing yourself in the scientific community.
But part of that too is to get people to understand that curiosity-driven research is not the random thing that it sounds like. When we describe it, it tends to sound random, but there's, well, yeah, that's hard. So here's a good book that talks
something that we're driven to do. I think as a species, we're driven to make art. We're driven to feed our curiosity.
Right.
We're driven to, sing and dance and love and experiment. And I see it as part and parcel of that same thing. I mean, you can't, can you go to an artist who works with oil and canvas and say, what is going to come of this?
Mm-hmm.
How will this, not everything in human endeavor leads to a marketable product.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of what we do to feed the soul. And I've always put science in that category. I was always told, my earliest memories from my father were that was why you studied science, that it was a form of exalting creation, the same way that art and music and poetry and all these things were. And so in some ways, my expectations were set at that point. Now we do need a little bit of money to stay alive while we do it.
Right. So let's talk about funding, because part of your book has actually been reprinted in a few, at least one magazine, online magazine article, just about why can't we have scientists? And it's because there's no money. And honestly, since this election happened, where I'm getting so many people going, yeah, science is so politicized. It'd be great to have it not be, oh, I don't trust climate scientists because they're always doing somebody's agenda. And I'm like, well, that's not exactly how science works. Well, yes, of course we get money from the government, but, it is funny, so you talk about how little money there is. You have an entire chapter on the funding issue. So why don't we get your perspective summary on that? Because I will make sure to share this link with people about the funding if they aren't going to pick up your book, but which I hope they do. But it's very interesting, especially for curiosity-driven scientists. Your insights.
Yeah, and this is, it's political, but it's not. If you look at the American Society for the Advancement of Science, AAAS, they did an analysis of the amount of the US budget that goes to research science, non-military research science. And it has stayed frozen at about 3% for the last 30 years. And of course, we've had Democratic presidents, we've had Republican presidents over that time period. But that number, that flat 3%, has really not changed. And so America's relative investment in research science is flat. But what's interesting about that is that we've been dutifully graduating more and more students. I mean, there's this constant rhetoric that we don't have enough scientists and that America is falling behind and people should become scientists, particularly girls. We have to get girls, for some reason, interested in science. And the crazy thing about that is that we're now training people, particularly in environmental fields. We're training people to do science that there's no funding to support it. I mean, this is, and we're working very hard, and we're spending your tax dollars to train people at a very high level so that they can work on these problems. And then they graduate and there's nowhere to do it, right? And I break down, for the reader, kind of the nickels and dimes of how that works out. Science, especially, the more esoteric curiosity-driven science, is in this very professor-student model with kind of nobody else, right? So you're either a professor or a student. Well, not all these students can become professors. I mean, so do we need the number of universities in the United States to double? That sounds good to me, but quadruple? I don't know. So during my whole career, if I replace myself plus a couple people, I've done my share. But we're training, we're teaching, and we're doing our best to teach it well. And so there's this big gap, and I understand that there's plenty of underfunded, worthwhile endeavors, in the United States, right? I mean, there's plenty of things we are working on as a country that are terribly underfunded, but it's the gap between the rhetoric that we hear about needing science and needing more science and science being this great thing, and the fact that there's very little investment, and also the fact that I don't think taxpayers would be satisfied with that. I mean, I think maybe it's just the people I talk to, but I think your average taxpayer is relatively positive about their money going towards scientific research compared to I don't know, buying balloons for the St. Patrick Day parade, at their local, I don't know, I'm trying to come up with something.
Sure. Something lasting, something that furthers our understanding.
So I wanted to break out, and people also encourage their kids into science thinking that it's this safe job, like, right. Don't be a musician, be a physicist because you'll be able to put food on the table and you'll be able to, that kind of thing. And that's,
excuse me.
Yeah, I laugh at the assumption scientists are making lots and lots and lots of money. Some are, but not all. Not many.
I don't know any.
I don't know them. That's why I'm always like, oh, you scientists looking for the next big paycheck. It's like, really? Okay.
and again, I don't have any regrets. I'm sure, knowing myself, I'm sure if we had to do it over again. And I asked Bill, after this came out, because we were just kids. We didn't even know how weird we were, I think, until we started telling these stories and people were saying, what? or people I knew from Georgia that contacted me and be like, I had no idea your life was this out of control back when I knew you in Georgia, which is always kind of a strange letter to get.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
How are you? Right. So, I asked him, I said, you know, Bill, did I ruin your life? You know, did we do something awful here? And he looked at me and he said, no, in a lot of ways, those were the happiest days of our lives. And we would do them all over again. But it's worth asking, you know, if somebody's dedicated to science and they're willing to work 80 hours a week and they're working for the university and they're educating people and they're doing a state-funded project, should they have to live in their car while they're doing it? Exactly. You know? I mean, I think that's worth asking. And, you know, a lot of the book was, a lot of the book is about Bill, because Bill is a person that's in science. There are Bills in research science. There are a lot of them, and they're kind of invisible. Bill is always telling me about how he would never want to be a professor. He would never want to do my job. He thinks it's the crappiest job in the world. And it's just that in some ways, this was the most important person in my life, and he was never going to come to the surface, and that just seemed so wrong. And I finally said, well, this guy is sort of the hero of my life. Why shouldn't he be the hero of a book?
Yeah.
And that was a big impetus also for telling this story.
Yeah. Well, and when you get to the end and where you're talking to Bill in that quiet moment, he says, "Put this in a book." Well, that one was pretty moving, and I can't really say in words how happy I felt when you told us that in whatever year it was that you were going to the University of Hawaii because they promised for the rest of his life to pay him a salary for part of the year. It's like, oh, finally, Bill gets what he.
Yeah, well, that deal fell through.
Yeah, but still, it was a happy thing.
Which is why we moved again. Yeah, right. So
it sounded good, but
it did, and it worked
and
for
so
a while.
There's a lot that's about Bill, but in the way of the rest of the book, it's not about Bill. It's about more than Bill.
Yeah.
But Bill also is fascinating, and it was rather late night. This quotation sort of resonated with me, because I've been in the situation of people not understanding relationships. You said people still puzzle over the two of us, Bill and me, but people that I meet still seem to wait for a label for what's between us. And, I felt so superior that I hadn't worried about that until you mentioned it. I hadn't thought of it. It's like Bill is there, and he's obviously the person who should be doing this with you. But
yeah,
it just seemed like nature to me.
I mean, that was the other thing that I wanted to address with the book is you do hear this. Do you remember when Harry met Sally?
Oh, of course.
And they keep coming back to this, can men and women be friends? That's like the hypothesis that gets tested during this movie. It's just like, this is why I never go to movies, right? So, and it always seemed to me that was so ridiculous because my life had taught me that the answer was yes. And it was a simple, beautiful yes that just worked. And my own opinion is that the answer has to be yes. If we're going to accomplish the things that we need to accomplish as people, we have to find a way to work together in honest and deep regard without and fully explore what it means to be brother and sister.
Right.
Well, and so you said yes without worrying about what to call it, and that's a breakthrough thing. It's like it's the right thing to do, and so here you are with Bill, and you say, what do you say? Let's go on some adventures together, and you say, yeah, that sounds like a good idea.
There's every once I don't read reviews on Amazon or whatever, but every once in a while one of my friends from grade school or whatever will send me something, and apparently there was a woman that was very, very upset that my husband was letting me go on trips with another.
Somebody said that to me when I'm explaining the book to someone. They're like, and her husband lets her?
Yes.
And I'm like,
well, of course.
Okay, yeah, apparently, and okay.
They have to read the book, and they'll learn something about relationships too.
You know, and you can't, I don't know. I mean, God, you know, if Bill knew that I was like on the internet analyzing this with other people, he would get like a huge, massive kick out of how ridiculous this is. Because what's to analyze? You know, you eat candy in the middle of the night and fix a busted car. I mean, it's not, it's not. But you know, people come into your life, and you can either keep your distance or not. And it's, I don't know. I don't know what to say about it. The best I can, I mean, right, like I said in the book, I don't know what to tell people.
Yep.
I can only just tell you the story
the
of
best
how.
we can do maybe is to say, read the book, because you need to know about Bill, and understanding Bill in this poetic way is a revelation.
Yeah, but everybody remembers having a best friend.
Yeah.
You know, and
how many people regret not saying, let's go do adventures with that friend for the rest of our life?
Well, I mean, that's another way in which we were just incredibly, incredibly lucky that was part of our jobs. And we didn't see the car accidents and the crap food and all that kind of stuff. We didn't see any of that as hardship. We were just so amazed that we got to do this thing. The only thing bad about it was we were so terrified it would end. We were so terrified that we'd run out of money and it would be all over. Yeah, that was the only bad part.
Butt Naked and Monkey Jungle. Those are my those phrases I'm just keeping in mind.
Yeah.
Welcome to Monkey Jungle.
I haven't gotten anything from Monkey Jungle yet, but I got letters.
From Butt Naked.
I get amazing mail. You know, it's so wonderful. I got a letter from
Stucky,
you know, the dog in the log.
Yeah.
I got a letter from them, and they're so, people love to see familiar things reflected on the page. They just they love to feel like something familiar is coming at them from the page. And I always thought my life was very small and introverted, and I had a few friends and stuff, but it's wonderful that you know, when you're doing all these things, you're actually sharing, you know, you're building experiences that you can use to bond with other people and make bridges. It's a wonderful thing.
You know,
it's amazing. Is Bill having some fan mail now?
Should. We'll have to write something.
Yeah, he's really not interested in, you know, I mean, we you know, and I don't actually follow sales or reviews or anything like that, because we want to keep that part of our lives intact, and we do still spend, you know, time in the lab and all that kind of stuff. So I have to say that, and we also living in Hawaii and now living, you know, in Oslo. We're pretty buffered from, you know, nothing's changed.
That's good to know. That's good to know. Because I thought for sure there would be someone reading the book going, I got to meet this Bill. You know?
You know, and you know, when you write, no one can, and I talked to a very good writer I know that wrote about some people that were very important in her life. And I talked to her a long time about, you know, what right do you really have to share things about another person? I mean, he'd already told me that he didn't care. Eventually he just told me to shut up and stop talking about it, because he did not. He said, I don't care what you write. Leave me alone. And she said, you know, you can never really write anybody else. You know, you're sharing a version. You're sharing the version that you know. But they are who they are.
Right.
And you know, everybody has their own story. I mean, before we end, I mean, that's what I would tell people, is that don't forget that you have a story. And that's what I really got out of this book. I mean, there's a long time when you're writing a book that you don't know if it'll get published. It's a crapshoot. And even if it gets published, you don't know if anybody will read it. Maybe nobody will read it, right? So you come to a place where you're writing for yourself. You're writing because you're trying to make sense of your life. You're trying to make all these, in my case, all this weird random stuff into a story with a beginning and a middle and an end. And that's what I got out of it, is I understand my own story more. And I would just encourage people to do that. You know, nobody else can write your story. And, but you can. Do it. Don't send it to me. Don't send it to me.
Yeah. Please, I don't want to review your book. You know, there were
qualified for that. I'm not an editor.
Right, yeah. I understand that. So there were two things in the book, and I don't want to give a spoiler away, but there were two different revelations about, I would say, physical or bodily limitations or differences or something that, you know, like you revealed them so far into the book that I had to stop and go, wait, and like reevaluate everything I had read based on this new information you had provided. That was amazing. I was like, ah.
Yeah. So we probably shouldn't, you know, talk too much about that, but that was a very conscious choice. So the structure of the book is very conscious, and I could bore you to death with exactly the, you know,
we'll do that one next.
Groups of 3 and all this kind of, you know, there's a structure to it, but that is also what being a scientist is like. You think you know something, and one small piece of information makes you go back and reevaluate everything you ever learned.
Yeah.
And so that was what I was going for with that. And I'm glad, I don't know if it worked exactly, but I'm really glad that people note that as something notable about their experience. And I was really hoping that because, gosh, in science that happens all the time. Or, well, it happens at key moments, and it changes everything.
It helps to avoid overreaction to, or inappropriately large reaction, I think.
Yeah, you know, you come, I mean, as a scientist, you constantly are being reminded of what you don't know. I mean, that's the interesting thing about being an expert, is that the more you become an expert in something, the more keenly you feel the areas where you don't have a good handle on what's happening. And so you learn to hold what you know and what you don't know very close. And I think that makes for a richer experience. And it makes the moment much more immediate.
Yeah. Speaking of expertise, if Joanne will let me, here's my question before we run out of time that I, you know, is silly, but I have to know, because I got to what you were writing on page 241, and I wrote down, I have a sudden urge to hear everything about the gradual contraction of medieval oaths involving the Virgin Mary's menstrual blood and the seepage of Christ's wounds, because I don't think I'll ever have another chance.
Yeah, I mean, I always think that's, you know, I love language. I love words. I love characters. I love the way people talk. All these things we say now that have no punch to them, like go to the devil, you know, that used to be a horrible thing to say to someone. You know, and so I love the fact that words are this abstraction that only exist, you know, when we inject meaning to them, and then we all have to kind of agree on the meaning for it to work. But when it works like nothing else. I mean, how can you embody a bigger curse than that? And it worked for a long time, and now it doesn't work at all. You know, it is this kind of really interesting thing. And so there's a lot of things that we say now that used to be
different,
really rough curses. But and you can see that in your own lifetime, probably. Stuff you hear on TV. You try saying that when you were a kid, right?
Yeah. George Carlin, 7 words you can't say on TV.
Maybe that's just part of how communication evolves, but it's, there's just things that I learned and was fascinated with that I got to put in the book. You're doing science, these things come to mind.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I really did use stuff that I learned in many other contexts in order to chase being a scientist. It's a really interesting thing.
Right, and I love, so first of all, I love how your book started out, you know, if you say this, if you do this, if you act, whatever, you start the book by saying, guess what? You're being a scientist. And then you sort of ended the book on that note too. And you asked a question, and oddly enough, as I'm listening to the book the second time, and I'm outside raking leaves, and you go, one question I want to know is, do the adult trees recognize their saplings or the seeds? And I was like, I never thought to ask that question. That's an amazing question. You know, because you just go, oh, no, of course they don't. Like, you don't even stop to ask that question, right? And I felt like that's like also a really important message. Like, you can ask anything. Why not? Just, you know, and then it's the scientist then says, well, I've asked the question. I think it's worthwhile. How am I going to find the answer?
And that goes back to childhood in a way, because I think people, you know, are like that. And anybody who's had kids knows that they go through this period where they ask questions from sun up until sun down, and they can't ask, they ask the next one before they even get an answer. And somehow we move away from that. And I think one of the only kind of special things about me is that, you know, I still do that. And so what I've found with students is that you can trigger that. You can kind of reawaken that if you kind of pull it out of them. And that becomes a really useful thing. I mean, the other thing about the book is that I get very frustrated with a lot of science writing. I don't know if I have time for another anecdote.
Go ahead.
Tell another one.
Yes.
But I look at science writing, and, you know, this was also about, gosh, there's so many books. Do we even need another one? And then I would stop for a while in the bookstore and read them. And then I would say, geez, I can write as good a book as I can write a better book. You know, so science writing, I think writing is a gift. You know, it's something that you give to the reader. And one thing that I am proud of, and that I think is special about me, is that I have a very high level of respect for my reader.
One last exercise.
Okay. In my respect for the reader. So, and then I think about, you know, writing as a gift. And I think about, you know, we've all had this where for your birthday or whatever, you get a gift from your friend, and he's a really good tennis player, and you're not. You like photography or something, and for your birthday he gives you a tennis racket, and you know the subtext is that you're supposed to get off your rear and learn to play tennis, and etc. And I think a lot of science writing is kind of that tennis racket given to you, and the problem with that is that gifts like that rarely result in a new tennis player. So what is the right gift? If the tennis racket is not the right gift, what is it? Well, first row seats to Wimbledon and a new camera lens? Is that the right gift? You know? And so I wanted to have this book get through. And so I made a very conscious effort at the very beginning of it to say in no uncertain terms explicitly that I'm talking to you, that this book is talking to you as an absolute equal, that we are on the same plane, and I'm going to share with you my stories, one scientist to another.
Yeah, it was an incredible book. I don't know the profile of who is watching right now, people who've watched it, read your book or not. But if you know, if you're one of those people who have not read it, hopefully this conversation has convinced you you should. Seriously, Jeff hears me go on and on about The Emperor of All Maladies. Like, Joanne, just shut up about that book, okay? But I love that book. But I swear your book is going equal or about to surpass, like knock it off its pedestal, because I love this book so much. But I come to it from the perspective of a scientist who sat at a sterile hood, who sits in a room, who I never crashed a car like that. But, you know, but you know, when I read this book, I immediately saw the appeal for people who don't do science, who would want to read this and engage with the story. And it's because it's just so much different. So, so I'm highly, highly recommending this book, and I'm highly recommending the audio if you are so inclined, because Hope's reading of it makes it even more magical. So anyway, Hope, we are so glad you came today. Really, really glad.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you. And it gives me great joy to hear that you found something good in the book.
I loved it. Loved it. Jeff, thank you.
Thanks to everyone. That's fabulous.
Okay.
Amazing. Thank you, audience. We will see you guys at the next time.
Okay. Bye.